Hello, my fellow Americans, and welcome to part 3 of the Matrix Mirror Effect. I thought it'd be funny if I did an Obama impression. Was it funny? Is this something that will, 10 years from now, I will regret doing? People are going to have footage of this? I don't know. Either way, we're on part 3. I hope it's the finale, because there's not much more to this. Of the Matrix Mirror Effect. In this part, we're doing the dynamic paint, and we're basically doing everything that we didn't do already. Because, if you recall, all we've done so far, and I'll explain this baseball in a second, all we've done is we've made a camera track with a plane, and on that plane we've projected a texture that no longer has the tracker dots. So we've gone rid of the tracker dots and we have a mirror. So now we need to do the actual effect, having an object come through it. And this is where the baseball comes in. So here I have a baseball. I got it from Blend Swap. So it doesn't really matter how I made it. You can do this effect with any object. So for this tutorial, you could literally just use a monkey and follow along. Oh, there's something in my nose, and there still is. Hopefully I can manage. You can do this with any object, so I'm just going to use a baseball. So let's do it. Let's use a baseball. So what we need to do is we basically need to set this up so it kind of comes out of the plane, and then we're just going to let physics do 100% of the work for us beyond that point. So I'm going to take the baseball, I'm going to make it baseball size and put it under the mirror. And what I'm thinking is from the perspective of this, we go like 10 frames, and then it's going to pop out or something like that, which basically means it's going to go above the mirror. So for 10 frames, it's going to be under the mirror, and we can hit I and keyframe its location. And then let's say it takes 20 frames, and we could play around with that. It's going to go over and keyframe it, and you can say, oh, how high up, whatever. So let's see what this looks like. Okay, that looks good. Maybe you want it to go further out, or like with the version I made for the actual 90-second video, I actually had this come out with a physics simulation instead of just like animating it. Just have it come out by some means. That looks good. And additionally, I would like to add some rotation, which we could do like this, and I'm going to do it procedurally. So I'm going to use a driver. Hash frame gives the frame number divided by 20. So every frame, it's going to take the frame number divided by 20 and make it rotate with that. So it's the same motion. It's just going to rotate now. Shouldn't really affect much. I'm going to do the same thing here, divided by a different number. This is just a nice way to get some motion that looks kind of organic, right? You have two drivers going at different speeds. But don't worry about that. So we have an object coming out of here. How do we have this actually distort our mirror? Well, it's a long story. First of all, let's have it distort just the mesh. To do this, I'm going to use dynamic paint, as we talked about. So I'm going to take this, subdivide a bunch. Why am I subdividing? Because dynamic paint, the way we're going to use it, uses geometry. The more geometry, the more resolution, in some sense. So just subdivide a lot. Once you've done that, take the plane, and again, it should work with shape keys. I keep mentioning it, not because I'm confident. It's like, oh, it should work with shape keys. I fucking hope it will. Take the plane, make it dynamic paint. It's going to be a canvas. It's going to be a waves. That's all you have to do. Make it a canvas, make it waves. And then for the baseball or whatever object you have, and you could have multiple, that affect the mirror. Also make it dynamic paint, but this one not a canvas, a brush. So long story short, it's a brush, and the plane is a canvas set to waves. What does this do? It does that, as you can see. And you can see the motion that, I mean, will make it look better, but the general like liquidy motion, it just works. You don't need to do any additional work. That's why that tutorial I was ragging on, the guy who did it in After Effects, that's why it doesn't look good. It's not physics-based. He's just trying to distort stuff. So you can see it's looking pretty choppy, so let's actually subdivide again as I was describing. So let's see what that looks like. Yeah, it's working. From the perspective of this, you can see that's what it looks like. And we're going to make it look better. But one of the main issues is you're going to notice when we actually show the texture, you can see that like nothing really happens. You can only see a tiny, tiny bit of distortion, and you have to really focus. So look at this. There's very little distortion, which is why we're going to need to do some texture coordinate stuff. And I was very proud when I discovered that, not going to lie. I'm like, today was a good day once I figured out how to fix this, and we will. But for now, let's work on the actual simulation. So imagine that you could see the reflection. If you could, I wouldn't like how big this effect is and it bounces off. So let's clean that up. To clean it up, we're going to go to our dynamic paint settings for the plane. And a couple things. First of all, you're going to notice that when the ripple hits the border, it's going to reflect. So it's traveling and then it bounces off, which looks cool. Not for this, not for what we're doing. So I'm going to enable open borders. That's going to make it so that it travels through and it, oh, well, I guess it is bouncing back, but it doesn't distort it as much on the edge. Long story short. So open borders helps a bit. The main setting we're going to mess with is dampening or damping. By the way, we can make this shade smooth to clean this up. So you can see it looks like this. When we take the damping and bring it up to from 0.04 to 0.1, you can see it's already dissipating much faster. Set it to 0.2, and you can see, wow, it's really not lasting very long. And you might think, oh, maybe this is not the way to do it. But from my experiments and the effects I was making, this was actually the best looking one. You want one that dissipates really quickly, especially because this way it's not going to interact with the border in any way, because I don't want that. So I just want it to transform a lot at the beginning, but then dissipate really quickly. So that's what I like, but you can mess around with it. Now, the question is, how do we get it to, especially since now we did this damping thing, you can barely tell that there's any distortion. It's so tiny. So how do we make this visible? Well, let me show you. What we're going to do is we're going to use this dynamic paint information somehow to add to our material. So what you're going to notice, and this was the clever thing I came up with, what you're going to notice is that dynamic paint, what it really is it takes the mesh and then it moves it up and down, depending on where it is on the wave, relative to the normal. So it's literally just kind of, and the normal is like the direction outward of the plane. It's literally just moving along the normal. What this means is that we can actually isolate this super easily, and I'll show you what I mean. So we have texture coordinates. Let me show you normal coordinates. This is the magic. You're going to notice that in the beginning it's just blue because we have a plane. Whenever you have a plane, the normal is going to be blue. It's going to be facing the z-axis, so it's going to be 0, 0, 1. In other words, it's equivalent. So if this is a vector, it's equivalent to this, whereas if the normal is different, it'd be different. It looks like this, but any perturbation, any dynamic paint, I don't know why I tried to say a fancy word, it's going to make it not blue. In other words, we can isolate this, and this was the cleverness. So you take this, we're going to process it through some math. So in other words, we want to say, in what areas are the normal coordinates not what they normally are? In other words, let's calculate the distance between our weird normal coordinates and the 0, 0, 1. So again, this is what a normal plane would have, and this is what we have. And we're going to calculate the distance, or in other words, the difference. And you can see it kind of makes it white in every area that has dynamic paint. And more than that, because it's shader nodes, we can actually manipulate this and stuff like that. But that's how we isolate this. Okay, so we've isolated it, and you're thinking, okay, so maybe we can make this a bit more visible, because again, you can't really see that dynamic paint, right? So you're like, okay, maybe we can make it a bit more visible. We mix it with the color there, so you can see, it kind of works, but it looks stupid. But the theory of it's correct, right? We've isolated the area where it should show up. The question is, how do we want to make it show up? Well, what I found out is if instead of UV coordinates, so right now it's using UV coordinates, this no tracker.footage, if you instead use reflection coordinates, it's going to do this weird thing where it doesn't really look good, but it does look like water, whatever I am looking at. What it's actually doing, if you care, and you could actually, at this point, try to set it to repeat and get some weird stuff. What it's actually doing is it's calculating, it's giving us texture coordinates as if it's like sending out a ray from the camera and it's going in a different direction. That's what reflection coordinates do. So it actually kind of works, long story short. What I figured out is if we take this and we're going to mix them with our UV coordinates, so it's going to be UV coordinates almost all the time, but only in some areas we're going to have reflection coordinates. In other words, these areas. So let's use that. And so you can see the transition here, but we only do it here. You could see now it looks super good. You wouldn't think it would, but it does. And it kind of works very well, especially if we go to rendered view. And I guess since the baseball has a BSDF, you want to light it properly. I'm not going to focus too much on that for this scene. You know what? If we're going to do this, let's do it proper. We'll do it in cycles. Nice thing about cycles is it's going to actually illuminate the ball with the texture of the mirror, so it's already going to look pretty good. So I'm just going to use an HDRI, like a random one. It doesn't matter too much. I mean, it does matter, but I'm going to be lazy, is what I'm trying to say. That one looks a bit weird. Just pick one that kind of matches the vibe. Okay, that one's not great, but it's fine. What was I talking about? Yeah, so the mirror trick. So you can see we're just mixing coordinates. It's a very simple setup, but here we've isolated the dynamic paint and, we've done the thing. Oh, I forgot about that dumb glitch that's going on. But we could make it look better. And by the way, this looks so cool. It's like really like distorting the mirror. We can make it look better. So one thing we could do is, again, send this through some math as I showed. When we multiply by 1, nothing changes, but we can change the strength of this mirrorification. So if you feel like it's too weak, you multiply by 2, it's going to be more visible. If it's too strong, reverse. So I'm going to keep it at 1.2 or something like that. So it's playing. Maybe cycles isn't the one to use for this, but whatever. So we have that. If you want to make the mirror, so here's what it looks like so far. And it's good. If you want to make it look even more visible, we could darken these areas, and it's easy to do this. I'm going to do it in a weird way. So what I'm going to do is so again, this is all an emission texture. Even though we're doing weird coordinate stuff, we're just saying put it directly on there. I'm going to use a BSDF, but only in some areas. So this is going to be areas with actual shading. If we take a BSDF and we mix it, so we can either have the normal pass, or by normal I mean like the emission pass. We either have emission or this darkened BSDF one. We take this and we mix it using our dynamic paint thing. You're going to notice, and especially if I multiply it, just so we can actually see what's going on here. You can see I've made a thing that can like darken the area. And if you go a bit too hard on this, it will look stupid. But here's the before and here's the after. Before, after. So you can see it's darkened a little. And what that's going to do is it's going to make it feel more present, especially if we increase that. So there's going to be just a bit more stuff going on. And especially if we're in cycles, yeah, now it's super visible. So here's before and after. So it has nice shading and it looks more real. And it's going to use the lighting from the HDRI and all this. So at this point, like that's how you do the effect. Okay, now the hard part about this is actually how do you render it, because it's not easy. Because if you think about it, what we have so far is, yeah, we have an object coming out and it's distorting this, but we're forgetting about one key component, which is the baseball should also be in the reflection here, but we somehow need to have a reflection on a plane that isn't actually a mirror, it's just texture that we're distorting. It's complicated, so that's the hard part. And let's talk about how to do that. So for now, let's render out what we have so far. So we have this plane. We could bake this out, maybe add some sub steps. It's just doing a bit more calculation. Let's cache this out. So I'm going to call DP, you dirty dog, DP1. So it's going to be our first cache. I'm just going to bake it. I would recommend baking because if you don't, some weird stuff could happen on render. So you want to have the simulation already calculated for. Man, there's nothing like tea. You want to have it calculated for, and let me show you what we have so far. So this is what we're rendering. Let's do it in cycles, and we could do it for 50 samples. Doesn't need to be that good, and we can denoise it a bit. By the way, should I mention this now? I'm not going to mention it. Let's render and see what happens. So we render it, and then for some reason it's rendering again, and then, okay, we have the results. So long story short, you're going to notice in the compositing, there's a lot going on. In the view layers, there's a lot going on. In the collection. Basically, when we did our tracking before in the movie clip editor and we hit a setup tracking scene, and I know some of you already know this, when you hit this button, it doesn't just add a camera, but it does a bunch of stuff. So it adds these collections that I don't want. It adds 2 view layers, so it's going to render twice. I don't want that, so I just want the foreground, which we can call main. And it's also going to add all these nodes that I don't care. I don't care about. So let's keep it simple. All we want is the footage. The footage is, it's the footage. And we also want the render layer, which we need to render again. So let's render to make sure something's there. You can see the render layer is everything that we made. It's the mirror that we liquefied, the baseball. and we want to put one on top of the other. So let's use an alpha over node. So I'm going to put the bottom socket's foreground. I'm going to put the render layer on top. So you can see this is what it looks like. Again, all we've done here is we've taken the footage, slapped this bad boy on top, and it looks like this now, which gets rid of the trackers. Let's actually go to a frame. Since we did all this hard work, let's actually go to a frame where we can see some of this liquefaction. So more towards here. So let's render that again. Shouldn't take too long since it's not actually calculating much. We're just distorting a texture. So it looks good, but we somehow need to, again, to put in this reflection. It's difficult because we're going to need to do this in another render layer, but we somehow need to put it on top of the footage, but behind the baseball. It's confusing. So let's talk about how to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our plane, which I'm going to call mirror, and the baseball. I'm going to take both of these and put them in a collection. So you select them, you hit M like M and M, or magnitude. You make a new collection. I'm going to call this main. And what we want to do is we're going to actually have two copies of this version and the one that's for the reflection. So let's make another collection. So duplicate collection. This one's going to be our reflection. And you're going to notice it kind of looks, I mean, it might look a bit weird because there's one overlapping on another. Just hit E while selecting this. And E makes this whole collection, everything in it, invisible and disabled for this render layer. Now we're going to make a new one. So I know we're doing a lot. I'm basically setting up a reflection pass. And this is the best way I found to do it. We're going to make a new view layer. So this is going to be our reflection. This is where we're rendering our reflection. And this time we hit E on the main. So what have we done? In the main, what have I done? In the main, we have everything we did. And we hid the reflection collection. In the reflection view layer, we have the opposite. We just have the reflection, which right now looks the same since we haven't done anything. For this one, here's the secret sauce. We're going to give this mirror a different material. A material that's actually going to reflect the baseball. So I'm going to unlink this and call this one shiny so that whatever we do to this material doesn't affect the other version. So, we got rid of everything. To make it a mirror, you could just use a principled BSDF. You bring down the roughness, and you can kind of see the baseballs showing up here. But we also make it metallic, and that seems like the best way to do it. And you can see, and now we have the reflection of the baseball. We also have a reflection of, what's that? It's a chandelier, of the HDRI, which is annoying, because we made it transparent. And you hit this, and it doesn't do anything. How do we get rid of it? This also took me a long time to figure out. It turns out it's simple. To get rid of the HDRI reflection, but keep the lighting, go to the World tab, go to Ray Visibility, so this is for the HDRI, the World shader, and get rid of Glossy. Apparently, that's how you do it. It makes sense because we're getting rid of any... Glossy basically means reflection ray. So we get rid of those. You don't want to get rid of diffuse ray. Why? Because that's what's lighting this. So you can see the baseball looks black. It's our only light source. But, glossy ray. So now we also have a pass for this. So if we go back, you can see we only have this collection, which is why we separated it. And in the reflection, we have this one, which if you have been paying attention, isn't correct. Why? Because this mirror should be distorted. So why is the baseball perfect? This is where it gets annoying. We're going to have to rebake the simulation, but it's going to look the same. We just have to bake it again. So for this new mirror, the one with the reflection, not the distortion, I'm going to go to the dynamic paint, which all the settings are the same. We're just going to make a new cache. So this is DP2. We're going to bake, and it's going to give us exactly the same thing unless you change something. And so you ask me, why not, when we made a new view layer, why not make a linked one? The reason is I haven't found a way to do that where I can then give the same object two different materials and two different layers. So I need literally two objects from what I understand. Long story short, you can see now we have the reflection, but it's also with this distorted wave. Okay, so let's pick a frame that we like, maybe this one. So it's come out and it looks good. Let's try to render this and see how difficult it is to composite. So I'm going to render. So this time it's going to render twice, the main and the reflection. Okay. When we go to compositing, it only looks like, the same thing. There's no reflection. Why? Because we haven't included it yet. So that's what we expect. Fine. Let's take the render layer. This one, we're going to use the reflection pass. So again, that's what this render looks like. We have this one that we slapped on top of the footage. Fine. But now we have the reflection. And I'm going to ask you, how do we put this on top? That's a big question. And you're thinking, I don't know, maybe use the alpha channel? Oh. So it's kind of like we're slapping on a big black rectangle is what you're telling me? Yeah. So that's the issue. Rendering out a reflection where everything else is transparent is not as simple as it should be. And I hope one day it is. So like in Blender, we have this thing called a shadow catcher. So we can render out a shadow and make everything else transparent. Perfect. It's a big problem. I'm glad we have that. We do not have a reflection catcher in that same way. Yes, there's the EV reflection plane. That's not what I'm talking about. So yeah, what you'd have to do maybe is like make a mask for this. So like maybe one way you could do that is you take this and you process it through like a greater than, and you say, where is it greater than 0? Or not the alpha. That's why it's looking weird, this one. You say, where is it greater than maybe 0.01? And that's kind of like a mask. And let's see what that looks like. It looks okay. Not really. Like this thing has a weird outline. We need a solution. And by the way, another issue that you might have not even thought of. What happens when the reflection... So I just picked a frame that was convenient for us. What happens when the reflection, when the baseball's like over the reflection? Like there should be some reflection behind this baseball. You know what I mean? It would be difficult to composite. Here's what we do. Here's the solution now that I've outlined the issue. First of all, for this reflection layer, we're going to make the baseball. So this is the baseball for this collection. We are going to make it a holdout. So it's actually, and you can see it made it transparent. So it's actually like there's a hole cut out of this render where the baseball is, because we just want to take the reflection and slap it on top without adding a second baseball. Okay? You know what I mean? Hopefully you know what I mean. So we want to do holdout. Nice thing about that is it gets rid of it, but also keeps the reflection, so it doesn't make it not reflective like if we disabled the glossy. So that's the first thing. Second of all, we're going to need to make a mask like we tried to make, but one that actually works. And the issue with this is to make a mask, you guessed it, it's another view layer. So this one's going to be the mask, but I swear this is it. For the mask, same process. I'm going to duplicate our reflection collection. This one we're going to call mask. So now we have 3. For this view layer, I'm going to hit E on everything that isn't the mask. For the reflection, I'm going to hit E on everything that isn't the reflection. And for main, I'm going to hit E on everything that isn't main. Long story short, each view layer has its own collection. Okay? So with the mask collection, I mean, it's good. We still want it to be reflective. But for this one, I'm going to make the baseball no longer a holdout, but we somehow need to turn this into a mask. Also, you might have noticed we need to rebake this. It should be distorted, this reflection. So let's make a third cache and bake it, and then I'll show you the solution. So somehow, so far, everything in this mask collection is the same as the reflection one. I mean, once we simulate this, it's just going to be a distorted reflection. I dribbled a little, like a baby. There's no difference here. So somehow we need to turn this information into a mask. The easiest way to do this is you take the baseball, and we are going to, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, from this view. We're going to take the baseball. I'm actually going to give this a special name. I'm going to call this baseball emission, which should give you a hint for what we're doing. For this baseball, we're literally going to make it glow white. And you're like, why are we going to make it glow white? Because that's going to isolate the area where... The reason we make it glow white is because then the reflection will glow white, hence giving us a mask. So it's kind of a clever way to do it. Which is, again, we need a reflection catcher, like a shadow catcher. Tell me if there is one and I just don't know about it, because I couldn't find it on any of the Stack Exchange things. Okay, So how do we do this? For this baseball, I'm gonna it has like 3 materials. Let's undo that, and instead, that looks cool. Instead, give it 1 material. I'm gonna call this baseball emission, which hopefully, and this one's literally just gonna be a nice emission material. Hopefully, this shouldn't affect anything else. And maybe for this one, we do also want to hold out shader actually. There we go. So it's let's see what this looks like. Yeah, so that works. So here's the reflection with the baseball cut out, and you can see the mask is literally the same thing, but it's highlighting where we have this. By the way, maybe you could make it brighter, just so we have like a very clean mask. I don't know if this matters, but yeah, I think that's fine. So long story short, which is like the 10th time I've said that, we have the mirror pass, we have the reflection pass, and now we have this mask pass, which is going to let us isolate it. So let's see what that looks like. Let's render this problematic frame. Okay. And by the way, it seems like we've been rendering with motion blur, which is a big plus. It looks good. Just want to say that. So we've taken the first render layer, the main, slapped it on top. We've now slapped on top the reflection, but it's not looking good even though we did the cutout. Because we have this black all around it. So now let's use this new render layer. Let's see it in action. We have the mask, which we're not going to use the alpha for because the alpha is still just, it's like that. But the image is better. So we use this as the factor. And you can see, I'm trying to, oh, by the way, actually, I do want to correct one thing I said. I want this emission to be equal to 1. Let's render that again. There we go. So it's looking weird before with the black because the emission was above 1 or something like that. But you can see here's without the reflection. So it's just the thing coming out, and here's with. So now the baseball's part of it. Let's pick a different frame that shows this a bit better. So at this point, probably best to look at it from main. So at this point, frame 35, it's come out of the mirror and the water's dissipated a little. So the reflection will still be distorted, just not as much. Okay. And you can see now the baseball is actually there as well. So before we had this, now we have this. And if we didn't use this, we'd have like some weird thing going on. So that, my friends, is how we do this whole thing. By the way, a bit of an advanced topic, but if you want to like alter the reflection, which in this case you shouldn't want to, like it's just a mirror, that's what it's going to look like. But in that like shot where I had the thing coming out of the microwave and it's kind of like a dark mirror, if you want to affect that, let me just show you how to do it, just a bit of bonus. Instead of this setup, what we do is we use a set alpha node. So this is just an indirect way of doing it. So we have this reflection, again, it's black. So we use this mask to set the alpha. So you can see now we've like fully isolated this. So here's the before and the after, we've isolated it. And now you could slap this on top. It's effectively the same. But the nice thing about this is now that you've isolated it, you could do a bunch of post-processing. So maybe your mirror is a bit glossy or something. Not glossy. The other word, it's very diffuse. It's rough. You can blur out your reflection, which might be useful depending on the mirror. You could also do some color correction. So like maybe like it should come out a bit darker or something like that. Like that's how you affect only the reflection. But if we go to any frame now, like on frame 121, it should have settled. So you have to render every single time. Now it should be nice and clean. The only thing that's a bit weird about this, I'm noticing, is that this reflection is kind of see-through. And I wonder if that was the emission issue. So let's see what we can do here. So before, and we just want to crisp that up a bit. Yeah, you could do it with a greater than, which does kind of add in this kind of harsh edge. And I think a way to fix that is you could either use the filter soften, which kind of helps. I mean, the issue is it kind of makes it dark. So maybe, I'm just going to play around here. Maybe it's the set alpha thing.
So we have this, we have that. Yep, and it's kind of half transparent. So I wonder, I haven't messed around with this too much, but I wonder if this is something we could clamp. Yeah, so now it's fully opaque, and we want to soften it a bit. So we use the filter, soften, and there you go. Now, you might be like asking, why is it so dark on this side? And I think it might just be because that's what the reflection looks like. Let's see, what does the reflection look like? Yeah, the reflection really is that dark. Or maybe it's like slightly less dark. But it's because like there's no light in between this mirror and the baseball, so it's almost like ambient occlusion in some sense, right? When two objects are close together, it kind of gets dark in between them. So I think it's that. But if you do want to like do some creative control, just like I talked about, maybe you could even do it with like gamma or something like that. You could change the color of this, probably the other way, closer to 0, brighten it up. So you have full control over this. You could make the reflection look different than what it should. But the key takeaway is we have the ripples, and they work, and we had to cache every single one. So here you can see there's a bit of ripple. And if we were to render this, I mean, I'm not gonna, because like, why? You already know what it's gonna look like. Or maybe I will. I don't know. But you can see what it's coming out to look like. Long story short, it's going to be this Eevee render, but with a reflection, and it looks better. So that is how you do the matrix effect. To generalize, you can also add other objects with the brush thing. Just make sure it's in every single collection and all this. And that's the effect. I mean, it's a lot of... almost all the work is in compositing and view and render layers. It's not in the actual simulating. So that's it. But that's almost comforting because, you know, I wouldn't want the effect itself to take a long time. Like, it's going to look predictable and the same and good right out of the box. Just some work to composite it together. But either way, that's part 3. And I think at this point I've covered everything there is to cover. Unless I'm forgetting something. We tracked it, we removed the dots, and we did the matrix effect with compositing. So I'm going to edit this together, probably make a blend somehow available or the footage or something so you could follow along. But I hope you enjoyed this 3-part mini tutorial series. I mean, it was like an hour and a half or something, maybe an hour total. But I hope I went over everything. If you have a question, let me know. I'll answer it. And thank you for being a patron. You're making, these channels possible. So thank you.